Okay, we've been talking about the biggest deal that you had for ABC Radio.
Yeah, Howard Cosell. And as I said, that started a friendship that existed through most of his years.
Now, both of you eventually transitioned to television.
True. The one guy who took a chance on putting Howard on television, because he was untouchable up to that point, was Roone Arledge. And Roone, for whom I worked at one point in my career, was one of the true geniuses in the business. And he saw in Howard something that went beyond his looks. And in fact, when we started Monday Night Football, by the time, there was a period when Jim Duffy left the radio network and went to the television network, became VP sales of the television network, and recruited me to leave the radio business and come into the television business. And actually I developed a special sales unit that concentrated on selling sports programming. Because in those days, ABC was a poor third in terms of being a competitive network. The only area that they excelled in was sports, which was run by a guy by the name of Roone Arledge. And, at one point, Roone said, there's ABC, and then there's ABC Sports. And we live by different rules and different directives than the rest of the company. And he was right. I mean, it was the elite group of the because they were making a lot of money. The rest of the network was losing money.
Now, why was that? Why?
Well, because we were a poor third network, we couldn't afford to compete for the major sports rights like Major League Baseball or the NBA football and basketball. I'm sorry, the NBA basketball and the college football and basketball, NCAA. And because we couldn't do that, Roone had to come up with some other kinds of sports programming that we could afford. And thus was born ABC's Wide World of Sports. And, it was kind of a collection of off-brand sports, if you will.
Were you there at the time that it started?
I wasn't there at the time when he started Wide World of Sports. I joined ABC Sports later. But, I became a very close friend of Roone's over the years. And so I'm, quite familiar with the early goings-on at ABC Sports. He took a guy that was a local news anchor in places like Baltimore and so forth, by the name of Jim McKay, and they put together a series of what I would call off-brand sports.
Me too.
And the kind of identifying slogan of ABC Sports, which was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, was personified by this famous clip that they, were on the sprockets of this ski jumper coming down the ski jump, losing it. And the horror of watching this guy fall, and instead of swooping off the thing, falling off the ski jump, landing in a heap at the bottom. The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. The background of that story is, they rushed the guy to the hospital. He had a couple of broken bones or whatever, and the first thing he asked for was the entry form for the following week's ski jump. A lot of strange people in sports in those days. But Roon cobbled together, a bunch of off-brand sports because they were cheap and available, and formed it into a program called ABC's Wide World of Sports, and introduced people to Australian rules football and ski jumping and ice skating and all of those things that really had not seen the light of day on television in the early days. And with commentary, intelligent commentary from Jim McKay and others. And pretty soon, people started to latch on to ABC's Wide World of Sports, and it became a top-rated show and an enormous profit maker for ABC, because to produce it, didn't cost beans. And then he started something called the American Sportsman, with Kurt Gowdy as the host, fishing, game hunting, and so forth, which brought in another whole group of viewers who would possibly not bother with things like football and so forth. And so, Roon, through his persistence and intelligence, was able to make ABC Sports a player, to the point where even though the network was, as a whole, was still not doing really well, he had made enough money that he convinced the powers that be to let him go and bid for one of the major franchises, which turned out to be NBA basketball. So that was really the beginnings of ABC Sports. Later, he won the awards of a number of Olympic rights, so we became the network of the Olympics. I think we probably did 5 or 6 consecutive Olympics. All of our production trucks would have ABC, the network of the Olympics kind of logos on it, and so forth. And much as NBC has now done by Dick Ebersol, whom Roon hired right out of college as an intern, and then became head of NBC Sports, and used the template of Roon to build NBC Sports into a major contender. They've carried probably the last 4 or 5 Olympics, and the new owner of NBC, Comcast, has just obtained the rights for the next several Olympics. So they have usurped the network of the Olympics thing, but in its day, it was the biggest thing that ABC had going for it.
Was there a particular Olympics that you personally found memorable?
Yeah, I went to all of them. I started what is today pretty much that which is de rigueur in sports sponsorship. I started what I call the all marketing program, and I started it with Monday Night Football, and determined that in addition to running commercials, the very association with a major sports franchise like Monday Night Football could be utilized by advertisers well beyond running a 30-second commercial. And so every Monday Night Football, for instance, every Monday Night Football game that was played in Denver or Chicago or wherever, I sold quarter sponsorships for categories. So in other words, I created the automotive category, and we would have only one automotive sponsor. And most of the time that was Ford. And so we made Ford our test case for this whole idea of an integrated marketing campaign based on their sponsorship of Monday Night Football. And so at every Monday night game, I'd be there. Their dealer association in that city, wherever the game was being played, would host a cocktail party preceding the game, invite all their best customers, and I'd get Howard Cosell or Dandy Don Meredith or Frank Gifford to come and spend a little time with these people, shaking hands, signing autographs, whatever. And it became a way of doing business. I mean, some of my advertising agency friends used to cuss me out by saying, you know, we'd go in with our plan for the upcoming year, and you know, the client, either the CEO or the vice president of marketing, would say, okay, that's all well and good, but you know, that Monday Night Football, that's in. Now let's talk about the other stuff. So it developed a loyalty and was useful to the advertisers for their dealerships and so forth. So I mean, all of those things really came about because I like to think that I'm a creative thinker in terms of coming up with something new, something different, what have you. And eventually that came to be in terms of our cable involvement. So I joined ABC Sports and was vice president of program development at ABC Sports, working closely with Roone. Roone was a true creative genius when it came to television programming. I mean, some of the producers would work on a piece for maybe a week, and Roone had to see every piece that went on the air under the label of ABC Sports. So they'd go in to screen it for him, and he'd look at it and he'd say, good piece, good. Did you ever think of taking the third element and moving that up to the top of the show and moving that down to, oh, why don't you try that? And invariably, it would be a big improvement over whatever. He had a great eye for television programming. He was not a great executive. Roone's work habits were not traditional, shall we say. I mean, and it was difficult for me being there because, A, we lived in the city, and I'm a semi-insomniac, so I'm always up very early in the morning. So I'd be into the building at about 7:15 because I was a 5-minute cab ride away. And Roone's day would not really begin until maybe 10, 11 o'clock. But he would stay until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night and have staff meetings at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, which meant for a long day for me. But it was one of the great experiences of my business career to work with Roone.
What do you think is the most important thing you learned from working with him?
Well, I guess thinking outside the box. I mean, starting, as I said before, with the fact that he couldn't go the traditional route and buy the NBA rights or the NFL rights because we didn't have the money. He had to start thinking outside the box and do something with less than something. That was a lesson that I learned from him that started me thinking in different directions, which later had impact on my career. But I was young and ambitious, and I was behind Roone, and as far as I could see, Roone wasn't going to go anywhere because he probably had the best job in television and had no ambitions to be president of ABC or whatever. I mean, he would have thought that was enormously boring. So I was kind of in a box because Roone was also what might be called a team leader. And if you were part of his team, that was terrific. But you were part of his team. And that meant don't go wandering off somewhere else looking for another job or whatever. Either you're with me or you're not with me. And so I was kind of in a box. I mean, I could not see any career path leading past Roon. And in the long run, I determined that my only choice was to leave the company.
But before we talk about leaving the company, I did want to ask you specifically about Monday Night Football, how it started, and your role in that.
Yeah. Again, that was Roon's genius. I mean, of course, being the enormous success that it has been, everybody said, well, you know, sure. I mean, put football on Monday night, people are going to watch it. Wrong. Sports had been tried innumerable times in prime time. And the going theory was that sports could not compete in prime time because most viewers were women. And if you couldn't attract women, which was assumed a sports show didn't, although that's changed, you couldn't put sports on in prime time. I mean, that was recognized throughout the industry. So when the NFL decided to form, I mean, they had already saturated Sunday afternoon with multiple networks. They decided to offer a Monday night franchise. Both NBC and CBS, Fox did not exist in those days, both of them had first shot at Monday Night Football, and both passed because they knew that sports didn't work in prime time, so why would they? Roon, again, because we were the third network and didn't have a lot of opportunities, said, I think we can make it go. And he went to management and convinced them that, because again, we didn't have much going elsewhere, so it wasn't that difficult a thing. But there were, we had to spend money on the rights. So he convinced management that we could make it work. And I remember I sat with him and others, and we were discussing, what are we going to do different that is going to make this thing work when everybody knows that sports don't work in prime time. That was Roon's idea. He said, what we have to do, he said, we'll get all the sports nuts. We know that. He said, but what we've got to do is we've got to institute something else in the program that will get casual sports viewers to tune in, to see something other than just the game itself. So everybody goes, yeah, okay, what? And he said, I think I am going to get Howard Cosell, who is the ultimate Eastern intellectual, hated by everybody west of the Mississippi and east of Los Angeles. And we're going to get Dandy Don Meredith, a real shit kicker from Texas, who is a enormous star. I mean, both playing college football there and later with the Dallas Cowboys. And we're going to put them in the booth together and let them have at each other. Because any subject you can name, Howard will be on one side of it, and you know that Dandy Don will be in the other. And he said, but, we got a game to call, so we'll get a straight man who will call the game, Frank Gifford. Initially, I'm sorry, it was not Frank Gifford. The first year of Monday Night Football, this is probably a trivia question that you might be able to win a couple of beers in a bar on. It was not Frank Gifford. And so the question is, who was it? And I'll leave that up to you to figure out. So, but Frank was on CBS Sports. He was working for CBS and was a great friend socially of Roon's and the Kennedys. Frank was very close to the Kennedy family. In fact, one of his sons married one of the Kennedy girls and so forth. And Roone was very close to the Kennedys. And in fact, we used to put on the Special Olympics, which nobody else wanted to put on, but Eunice Shriver was greatly involved with it, and Roone did it as a favor to Eunice Shriver. And so Roone enticed Frank to come over to ABC and be the play-by-play announcer on Monday Night Football. But now he's got what he wanted in the booth. He's got something going on other than the game. And it worked to perfection. And of course, the firebrand, I mean, the guy who attracted all of the venom, all of the cheers, and so it was Howard. There was one, Sports Illustrated used to run a contest each year for the favorite sportscaster of the year. And they used to also run a contest for the most hated sportscaster of the year. Howard won them both in 1 year. There were no neutrals on Howard. Either you loved Howard because he was brilliant and knew, had a photographic memory, by the way, and so could call facts up out of the blue. I mean, amazing. And you had Dandy, who was, Mr. Texas and Midwest and all things that were, aw shucks and so forth. So it became, it was an interesting time, because I used to travel with Monday Night Football because of when I was in sales, I ran these events every night of Monday Night Football for sponsors. And I eventually became part of the gang, the group, and we'd get into a town, let's say we were going to do a Denver game. We'd get into town usually on Sunday afternoon, and the producer, Don Ohlmeyer, would call a production meeting Sunday evening, and everybody would show up, and we'd lay out the game plan. Dandy would always be late. And Dandy would arrive. Frank, by the way, would have arrived first thing Sunday morning, shut himself up in his hotel room, and viewed game film from preceding games from the two teams who were playing, so that he knew all of the tendencies and so forth of each team. So, he worked very hard. Dandy would arrive late for the meeting, usually, and his first question would be, who's playing? Dandy was not great on preparation, but was enormously engaging. I mean, he, you couldn't help but love the guy. He was just a big teddy bear of a guy and what have you. But he and Howard would clash on, if a subject came up and Howard said it was black, you'd be sure that Dandy would say it was white. And so these little back and forths sometimes got a little bit prickly, sometimes got a lot prickly. And in all the gossip columns, in those days, you have to realize that Monday Night Football in its day had sociological implications. They changed the way some Americans lived. For instance, restaurants used to stay open Monday through Saturday and close on Sundays. Monday night became such a poor night for restaurants because everybody was home watching Monday Night Football that now the bulk of the restaurants are open Tuesday through Sunday and close on Mondays. So it just was, it had 50 shares. It was enormous. And so Roone's genius of taking something that everybody knew would not work and making it work, was the thing that really saved ABC to a great extent. Because, we started to make big profits on Monday Night Football, and that allowed us to go after the NBA franchise. So we got the NBA franchise. We had the NCAA college franchise. We were able to go after the PGA golf tour. And, you know, we became known as the network of the Olympics and later. But in the early days, we were known as the ABC Sports Network. And that gave, you know, the programming people a little more clout to go out and get traction with some of the stars they might not have been able to attract otherwise. We also had a guy that Leonard Goldenson, the chairman and founder, brought in from KABC, which is our LA station, Channel 7 out there. Big, good-looking, always tanned guy by the name of Elton Rule, who ran the station. And he brought him to New York, and Elton became the CEO of ABC. And that changed the network. I mean, first of all, Elton was an LA guy and had great friends in the production community out there. One of his closest friends was Aaron Spelling. And if you remember back in those days, the hits just kept coming. You know, everything that Aaron put on became a major success. And so that was the transformation of ABC. But getting back to my personal situation, I mean, there I was, you know, stuck. Loved the job, making good money, what have you, but, you know, I was young and ambitious, and I had to find out where I next could go to make my mark. And having decided that I had to leave ABC to do that, as luck would have it, Barry Frank, who used to work, when I first worked with ABC Sports, Barry worked there too, ex-J. Walter Thompson advertising guy, smart guy, and he was hired away from ABC by Mark McCormick, and who was the king of the sports agents in those days. He had the big three golfers, Player, Nicklaus, and Palmer. And actually, Arnold Palmer became his partner in the firm, IMG, International Management Group. And I did a lot of business with them when I was at ABC Sports. And Barry, who had been head of their production company, was hired by CBS to become president of CBS Sports. So he left IMG. And so I got a call one day from Mark McCormick, as I say, whom I knew from having done business with. And he said, Barry's leaving. He said, I need somebody to come over and run my production company. And he said, I'd like you to be that guy. He said, you run the production company. I'll also make you a director of the parent company, and you know, come to all the board meetings. What he didn't tell me was that the board meetings were in Cleveland, Ohio, which was his hometown. But I thought about it, and I finally said yes. And but I did something that, you know, later turned out to be a good move. Because Elton Rule, who used to come to Monday Night Football games, to the Olympics, whatever, and so I got to know him, and he was always very kind to me. He was just a kind man. And so I wanted him to know that, you know, my leaving ABC really had nothing to do with my experience at ABC. I loved it. I loved the company. I loved, you know, everything except that I had to get out of the box that I was in.
How did Roone take your leaving?
Badly. In fact, we spent a couple of nights until 10 or 11 o'clock with him and with Fred Pierce, who was president of the television network at the time, talking about what they could do for me that would entice me to stay. But, you know, I mean, no matter what it was, and it was always at ABC Sports, because Roone, you know, as I said, didn't want anybody leaving ABC Sports to go somewhere else in the company. You know, I was always behind Roone, and that was my primary problem. not because I didn't enjoy working with him, but because my assessment was he wasn't going anywhere. Why would he? He got the best job. And so I had to get out. And so eventually I did leave. But I did take the time to visit with Elton Rule just to tell him that, you know, it had nothing to do with my experience at the company, loved it, what have you. I just had, for a career path thing, I had to leave. So Elton at that time said to me, okay. He said, but he was an old Army guy. He'd been a captain in the Army. He said, we're going to consider you on TDY, which meant temporary duty something. He said, and we're going to bring you back. I said, you know, Mr. Rule, I'd love it. I'd love to come back. And he said, okay. So I left and I went to Mark McCormick. And I think the second day I was in the job, because we also, in addition to producing programming, television programming for all of the networks, we also represented rights to sell to the networks. Wimbledon, U.S. Open tennis, golf, obviously, so forth. So the second day I was there, one of the guys who worked for me came rushing into the office and said, we're about to lose the U.S. Open franchise. I said, what do you mean we're about to lose? He said, well, our contract is up for renewal next month. And he said, I understand I got a mole in there, and they are unhappy with the way we have handled their negotiations, and they're going to move to another agent. Whoa, it's probably not a good way to start a job, losing one of the bigger accounts that we had the first week. So I said, who makes these decisions? They said, well, they have an executive committee. And he said, actually, they're meeting tomorrow at O'Hare Motel, whatever, at the airport in O'Hare. They're coming in from different places. So I said, okay. So I got on a plane that morning. I went out to O'Hare. I knew nobody in the thing. And I found out which room that they were holding their meeting in. And I went and I waited outside. They had a coffee break, came out. I went up to one of the guys who turned out to be the president of the thing, introduced myself, and said, you know, I understand you are about to dump IMG. And he said, who told you that? I said, well, that's unimportant. I said, but I mean, is that true? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, it is. I said, has the final decision been made yet? And he said, well, no, but we'll make it this afternoon in our meeting. I said, well, you know, I'm new in the job. I just came from ABC Sports. I know most of the players. I'm a tennis aficionado. I'd like to come in and make a final pitch to retain the franchise. So he said, well, we got a heavy schedule. I said, you know, give me 15 minutes. I said, okay, you got 15 minutes. So I went in and introduced myself, and, you know, I invoked the magic name of Roone Arledge. You know, I'm a disciple of Roone Arledge. I've had a pretty good career, and what I'd like to know is, since I'm new on the job, what the problem is, and hopefully I can correct it. And so that started a discussion of some of the things that had been done or not done, more likely not done. And I, you know, was pretty knowledgeable about the whole situation, and by the time my 15 minutes became an hour, and by the time I left, we had retained that franchise, and which later became an interesting thing, because I had to negotiate the upcoming rights with CBS, which had the rights to the U.S. Open tennis. NBC had Wimbledon, which we also represented. So I got a call from the guy that ran NBC Sports, whom I knew, who said, listen, we want the U.S. Open. He said, I'm giving you a blank check. You fill in the number that we have. Wow, I thought. So I went back to the U.S. Tennis Association meeting, and the guy who was running it, Southerner, name I forget, called me off to one side and he said, listen, boy, he said, we got to get ourselves a big increase in the rights payment. I said, well, sure, we'll get an increase. He said, no, I'm talking double. I said, well, why do you need double? I mean, I think I could probably get you a 10 or 15% increase, which is normal. He said, no. He said, we're going to leave Forest Hills and we're going to build our own tennis stadium and have the U.S. Open in the U.S. Open Stadium. I said, wow. Because I was a tennis nut, and I always thought that Forest Hills was about as close as we were going to come to Wimbledon. So I said, you're not going to take it out of New York? He said, no, we'll be in New York, don't worry. What I didn't ask was, the next question was, where in New York are you going to build this thing? Which I should have asked. So I got hold of Mark McCormick, and I said, Mark, I got a blank check from NBC. They want the, he said, no. We don't want one network to have both Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. That will take away our negotiating power. He said, so you got to find a way to keep it at to keep it at CBS, and to keep Wimbledon at NBC. So I went to the head of CBS Sports, my old friend Barry Frank. I said, Barry, I got a blank check from your competitors. And he said, he said, I'm new in the job. The first thing I'm going to do is lose one of the premier thing. He said, we're not going to lose it. I said, I'll work with you. So I got what I needed, which was double the thing. And I went back and told my friend at the U.S. Tennis Association. And he said, beautiful. So I said, by the way, where are you going to build it? And he said, well, you remember where the old 1939 World's Fair was, out in Flushing Meadows? I said, yeah. He's going to build it there. I said, whoa, that's right next to LaGuardia Airport. I said, what about the planes coming in? He said, don't worry about it. Well, some years later, it came out. Mayor Dinkins was the mayor, a great tennis fan, and somehow they'd made a little agreement off to the side that during the U.S. Open, they would divert the path of planes coming into LaGuardia so that they didn't fly over the U.S. Open. That later became a political football and whatever, but that's the way it was, and so they built the the U.S. Open tennis facility out in Flushing. I've stopped going. It's an entirely different thing. I mean, in those days you wore tennis whites when you played, and there was a decorum in the stands. As soon as someone was ready to serve, a hush fell over the stadium. Well, now you get people hollering and shouting, and it's a different game.
Now you returned to ABC. You had set that
I
stage.
did. Almost a year to the day after I'd left, I got a phone call from Elton Rule, and he said, let's have a drink after work. So I did, and we met in his suite in the hotel, and he told me that his right-hand guy, Marty Pompadour, had just told him that morning that he was leaving to become president of Ziff Davis. Bill Ziff had decided he was big enough in the publishing world that he wanted to get into the electronic media world and wanted to buy television stations. So he hired Marty as the CEO of Ziff Davis. And so Elton said, and I want you to come back and replace Marty. So I thought about it, and I said, gee, that's, I appreciate the offer. I said, but that's a staff job, and I'm a line guy. I run things. I don't. He said, okay, give me 2 years in the job, and I will give you the television division to run. Okay, I said, that sounds good. So I went as assistant to the president, and that was a great time because Elton, as I said, changed the face of ABC. Instead of a poor third, I mean, we were hot. But Elton was not a detail guy. Elton was a big picture guy, and was enormously successful at it, and changed the whole culture of ABC while he was CEO. But he didn't like, the nitty gritty of the day-to-day operation and the little problems that came up, and that was my job. And so, the corporate staff at ABC was laughingly small. I mean, it consisted of Leonard Goldenson, the founder and chairman, Elton Rule, the CEO, Mike Millardi, who was the chief financial officer, our chief legal counsel, Ev Ehrlich, and me. And so each of them had, the legal thing, financial thing, the chairman thing, whatever. Everything else kind of landed on my desk. And it was interesting because in those days, it was the age of diversification. The key phrase was, if you're going to be a successful company, you got to diversify. And so at one point, ABC was in the record business, huge record company, ABC Dunhill, big record company. We were in the scenic attractions business. We owned Silver Springs, the home of the glass-bottom boat, and Weeki Wachee Springs, the home of the underwater mermaid show, and a couple of other things whose names I can't remember. We were in the bottled water business, whatever. I mean, we were in all of these other businesses, none of which we had the foggiest idea how to run. But it was the age of diversification, and we were right in there. So I used to get, things over my desk that I had no clue. And one of them was the ABC record company, which was losing big time. And Elton called me in one day and he said, what are we going to do about this? I said, well, I know little or nothing about the record business, but... So, in any event, we decided that something had to be done with the record company. And I looked at the financials, and I said, wow, this is ridiculous. The costs are totally out of control, whatever. So I said, who's the guy that is running it? And it was Jerry somebody, who was an ex-agent and had been hired because he could bring some big talent to ABC Dunhill Records. And we were a big record company. I mean, we had a full service thing. We had a classical division. We had a rock division. We had a middle of the road division. Big. We had Chaka Khan and B.B. King and I mean, big. And we were losing big money. So I said, it looks to be like, this guy who's running the thing doesn't have control of it. So Elton said, yeah. He said, I don't think he's a very good manager. I guess not. So I said, well, then I guess we should get rid of him. And he said, okay. He said, who do we get to replace him? I said, I don't know, but, kind of a general theme is if you're looking to replace somebody, what you might do is look at somebody who's a number 2 at a competitor who is behind a very strong number 1, and so therefore you give him the opportunity to become number 1, and maybe. He said, well, who is that? I said, I have no idea, but let me ask around and see what I can find out. So I discovered that at CBS Records, there was a number 2 by the name of Ron Alexenberg, who was behind a legend in the business, Walter Yetnikoff, who was not going anywhere because he had the biggest and the best. And I said, you know, maybe we grab this guy Alexenberg. He's got a good reputation, smart guy, and he's in a box. I know about those. So he said, okay, let's talk. So I contacted, through a friend, I contacted him, and we set up a meeting late at night in Elton's suite, and went through and offered him the CEO job. And he said, okay, I'll do it. So we then turned it over to the lawyers to negotiate the contract and what have you, because we had pretty much agreed on what the parameters of the payment would be, and it was a big jump for him. So Leonard Goldenson and Elton Rule and I got on a plane and went out to the ABC Entertainment Center, and we called over the guy who was running ABC Records. And Elton said to him, Jerry, we're going to have to let you go. The results have been poor. And to his credit, Jerry, who turned out to be a really good guy, smart guy, just didn't know how to run a company. He said, I wondered what kept you, you know. So, I mean, it was fine. And so we were waiting for a phone call from Ev Ehrlich, our chief legal counsel, who was working out the final details on signing Ron. He called late in the afternoon, and he said, we got a problem. What problem? Well, Mr. Alexenberg took our offer back to CBS, and they topped it. So he's not leaving. So Leonard Goldenson turns to Elton Rule and says, Elton, we got this $40 million a year business sitting there with nobody to run it. What are we going to do? Elton turns to me and says, Herb, we got this $40 million a year business. We got nobody to run it. What are we going to do? I turned around, and there's nobody there. So I see the both of them looking at me. I go, whoa, 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 hold it. You know, at this stage in my life, I am not about to change career paths, and if I did, it would not be to get into the record industry. And so he said, Elton said, okay. But what you got to do is you got to babysit it until we find somebody to run it. I said, okay. So that set off. I stayed at the Beverly Wilshire, which is where all the ABC people used to stay, and began a very strange 3 months of my life as acting chairman of ABC Dunhill Records. And so the next morning I had to go to the record company to explain to the employees what was going on. And I had to look up the address in the phone book. I'd never been there. They own their own building over on Beverly Boulevard. I mean, we were still not a rich company. So I would rent a car when we went to LA from Hertz or somebody. And I'd usually rent something, you know, on the low end of the scale. I think in those days it was Chevette, which was kind of a small Chevy. And so I got in my Chevette and I drove over to this building, and they had their private parking lot. And I pulled into the parking lot and I counted 3 Cornicias and about 18 Mercedes and whatever. And I said, aha, that may be part of the problem. And everybody had their own parking spot with their name on it. And so I pulled into the chairman's because I knew he wasn't coming in. And there was my little Chevette sitting there among all the other cars. So I went into the building and asked for Jerry's office, and the receptionist said he's on the 2nd floor in the corner. So I went up, and there was 2 secretaries' desks and 1 secretary, which also turned out to be part of the problem. And so I introduced myself, and I said, you know, Jerry is not, she said, we know. The rumor has spread. So I said, okay, let's get the key people into the office here. I want to talk to them. And she said, well, who do you want? I said, I have no idea. I don't know anybody. I said, so whoever used to be in Jerry's staff meetings, why didn't you? She said, Jerry, he never had staff meetings. I said, how long you been here? She said, 3 years. I said, you know who to invite, right? And in those days, in New York, we used to wear the 3-piece suits, you know, the vest. And these people came wandering in. All the guys have the shirts open down to here with the gold chains and thing. P.S. 2 days later, I counted 4 three-piece suits. That's stupid people. And I explained what was going on and said, I'd ask each of you to continue doing what you're doing and whatever. So I went back to my little hotel room and eventually had to have them cut the phones off at midnight because I was getting these wild calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. Hey, man, you got to come down here and see so-and-so. I hear you're the new suit from ABC Records. And I had them cut the phones off because I said to the A&R guys, I said, I don't want to get involved in the talent side of things. I'm strictly going to look at the financials. So one of the A&R guys said to me, look, I've been working on this guy for 6 months. He's about ready to sign, but he wants to talk to the man. So he said, unfortunately, right now, you're the man, so you got to come. He's playing here locally. You got to come and spend some time with him and hopefully get him to sign. So I said, all right. So I went and watched this young guy who was terrific, and you didn't have to be a genius to figure out this was a spirit. So we went back to the dressing room, and I talked with him for a while, and eventually he signed on the bottom line, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. My one and only venture into the record business. I quit while I was ahead, and 3 months later, identified somebody within the company who we named as CEO, and his mandate was to put this company into proper position to be sold. And eventually, we sold it, and we were out of the record business. But that was one of the more interesting 3 months of my life. I mean, they used to fly me back here every second weekend to be with Ann, or else fly her out there for a weekend and what have you. And as I mentioned, she was, doing her soap and was not sitting around waiting for me to come home. So, but, so much for the diversification period of the company.
At that point, Leonard Goldenson, was he still very hands-on, still running?
Still, he was probably in his late 70s, but to my observation, still probably the most forward-thinking guy in the company. He was my mentor. He was just a wonderful man, very warm, enormously bright, and really loved the industry and the company.
What was his vision for the company?
His vision was to become exactly what it became, which was one of the leading networks in the country. I mean, in those days, don't forget, there were only 3 networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC. Okay, the 3 networks split up the largest television market in the world 3 ways. So it was an enormously profitable business. Even the 3rd network, was able to make good money on the thing. So while I was slaving away, doing what I was doing, my physics background entered into the picture, because while I didn't spend a lot of time, I did continue to get all the technical journals so I could keep up with what was down the road for the industry. And so I became aware of things that were developing, like multi-channel MDS and DBS and cable and all those things. Long before most of the people in the industry, before it was on their radar. So I did a little bit of a white paper for Leonard, in which I said, we've had it pretty good. 3 of us have split the biggest television business in the world 3 ways. But pretty soon, there are these other distribution forms that will come online and offer people other choices. And if you offer people choices, probably they're going to find something they like, which means that we will have an erosion of our audience because they're now watching something else. And if we lose audience, we also lose revenue because we get paid by the eyeball. So if we have an erosion of our audience, we'll also have an erosion of our revenue. And so Leonard said, oh. He said, what can we do about that? I mean, we can't stop these other things from developing, right? I said, no. They're coming on headstrong. I said, so kind of a simple syllogism is, if you are part of the erodees and your line is going this way, probably you should become part of the eroders, so that as one line is going this way, the other line is going this way, and at some point they're going to cross, and it'll be a good thing to be, in those businesses that are the competitors. He said, you're right. What do we do? I said, well, we can't get into the distribution side. We can't become a cable company because Congress has mandated that the network companies cannot own cable systems, which, by the way, turned out to be a very smart thing, because otherwise we would have warehoused the cable business as best we could to keep it from developing. Because it didn't take long for everybody to figure out, uh-oh, we got a problem. So I said, so we can't get into the distribution side. We can't get into the hardware side because we have no experience in, our NBC is part of RCA, which manufactures television sets and whatever, and CBS manufactures television sets and whatever. We have nothing. So can't get into the hardware side, can't get into the distribution side. That leaves software. So what we probably should do is get into the cable programming business. And Leonard said, well, yeah, but that's going to be in competition with our own affiliated stations. That's not going to sit well. I said, yeah, I thought about that. So I guess the thing that we should do is start a network that is a niche network that would appeal to certain portions of the population that don't normally watch us anyway. And I would suggest an arts channel, performing and visual arts. There's nothing like it on any of the networks now. And, there are people who love opera and ballet and musical performance. Probably won't be a big business, but it'll get us into the cable programming business.
What was the state of cable at that time?
What was the
state of cable at that time?
Well, there were a couple of networks that existed. CNN, the Weather Channel, probably USA Network, but not many, very few. So Leonard said, let's do it. I said, good. I will immediately institute a search to find somebody. He said, no. I want you to do it. I said, remember me? I'm the guy that, next year is supposed to take over the television. And he said, he was very smart. He said, if you believe what you put down in that little paper that you wrote, a young man of your age does not want to be part of an eroding business. You should become part of the... I said, you got me, Leonard. You're right. I said, all right, because I was kind of intrigued with it anyway. It was technical, which meant that I could actually use something I'd learned. But it was, it was new and exciting and whatever. And I said, okay, what kind of a staff should I? He said, one person. I said, one person? He said, pick anybody you want in the company, but you got one person. I said, how? He said, listen, you're starting a new business. He said, what you have to do is keep your low overhead. So therefore, start with one person. So I chose a guy who was in the company that I knew not well, but he had, for what I knew of him, he was enormously bright and was prickly. and had probably alienated about 3/4 of the people that he worked for. But I didn't care because he was smart, and I needed that smart guy to bounce things off and so forth. So I said, I'll take Healy. And I said, okay. And so I called Jack and explained to him what we were up to, asked him if he'd like to join. He said, sounds like, might be interesting. Let's do it. And so Jack became my alter ego, my right-hand man.
Stop there to change the tape.
Okay.